Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for our session on the last mile of segregation of duties. Mitigating residual risk. This is a challenge that many organizations have talked to us about, if not all of them. And we're really going to try and get to the emotional, psychological and physical barriers to getting segregation of duties as a sustainable process. This webcast is scheduled for 45 minutes. It'll probably be closer to 50, but we look forward to your participation. My name's Dan French. I'm founder and CEO of Consider Solutions. I know many of you on this webcast, so thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to be joined by Martin Reeves, who's a consulting manager with Consider Solutions, and he's been advising and running internal controls and SoD programs around the world for about 10 years. With us, and has actually advised in, I think, 4 continents so far. Is that correct, Martin? Welcome.
I think so. Hi, everybody.
So that's your panel for the day, or for the 45 minutes. Just a few words of introduction around Consider Solutions, why we're giving this webcast, and our particular perspective on it. Our sort of mission in life is to help organizations on the road to what is hopefully not a mythical place of world-class finance. And that's, as you see on the left, is about helping drive better business results, reducing the cost of finance, optimizing cash flow, and having better risk management. And on the right-hand side, you see our lenses or our pillars of work: financial control and compliance, broader risk assurance, which is to do with error, waste, fraud, anti-bribery and corruption, and the like, financial process optimization, all on a pillar of IT and ERP enablement. And of course, everyone here talking about segregation duties will know very clearly that that is absolutely the nexus of financial control and compliance and IT and ERP. And that kind of link point may indeed be part of the reason why we have some of the challenges we have. We work with organizations, typically globally, global organizations operating in all corners of the world. These are some of the names. And I won't go into any detail other than that it's these organizations and many others that really informed the thoughts we want to share with you today. We've learned from a lot of the experiences, and we're sharing them with you today. So in terms of the structure, I've given you an introduction. I want to talk a little bit about internal control over financial reporting and the role of segregation of duties. Talk a little bit about the progress so far for most organizations. This idea of the wall in the SoD marathon, that 17-mile moment where you suddenly realize that everything is lost and you no longer have the willpower, the vision or anything else to complete the SoD marathon, and what that really is and what it entails, and really how to turn SoD into a sustainable, repeatable process. And part of that is going to be around business-focused SoD remediation, which is one of the big challenges. And then we're going to have a look at some considerations for a deeper dive, some conclusions, and some Q&A. And on the topic of Q&A, please ask questions as we go through. It's really important. Just as you think about them, pop them in. On the interface in front of you, there is a Q&A panel. Enter them, and we will endeavor to respond to them at the end. If we don't have time, we will respond by email afterwards, so you will definitely get a response. If you've got any technical issues, please use the same forum, and our team will endeavor to help you out. So that's where that's what we're going to cover in the next 45 or so minutes. So in terms of context, internal controls of financial reporting, bit of context. I like this picture. This is a COBIT diagram, which is a nice way of bringing together the hierarchy of what's important in terms of financial results in the business, in terms of significant accounts in the financial statements, relating that to business processes such as purchase to pay, order to cash, record to report, and so on, and then to the specific applications that support those and the transactions within it and how they're supported by IT. And of course, then the role of controls, whether they're IT general controls, application controls, or business process controls, or even entity level controls. And the interesting thing about segregation of duties, of course, is one of those controls that covers a little bit IT general controls, but also an application control. So I like that picture as a way of understanding why, the role of controls in the ultimate assurance that the organization is operating in a fair manner and reporting its results in a way that's fair and accurate. But of course, controls are wonderful things, but they also do lead us into a false sense of security. Those of you who have attended any presentation of mine over the years will regularly see this photograph, so I manage to get it into pretty much every talk I give. But I like it because it's so relevant. So if you look at this entrance to a parking lot, if you drive in, you'll see, if you look very carefully in the middle of that entranceway, there is an electronic parking barrier. As you drive after it, you wave your ID badge, it identifies you as an employee, opens the barrier, lets you through, and the same thing on the way out. And of course, every 6 months, the company that provides a barrier, they send an engineer, and they can prove categorically that that barrier works 100% of the time. And that's wonderful. But obviously, when snow falls, we start to realize there's a bit bigger picture, and the tire tracks in the snow indicate that even if the barrier is working 100% of the time, people have the smarts to find a way of achieving their objectives, even if they've left their ID pass at home. And I think that's a really important metaphor for every aspect of business process, standardization, and control, because it's easy for us to believe, and it's easy for our stakeholders to believe, that our parking barriers, our controls, if you like, are 100% effective. And even when they are performing at 100%, does it actually manage a risk? And this is very relevant to SoD and pretty much every other control. So that's a micro view, but at the macro level, we've also got a different thing going on. If you look at this image or set of images from the top right, going counterclockwise, most of us now are in organizations where we have globally integrated processes. Operations are no longer siloed by country or region. So in many organizations now, you can have a vendor in Australia, you can raise a purchase order in Buenos Aires for goods to be delivered in Texas, and invoicing, settlement, and payments done in a shared service center in Krakow, Poland. And that's wonderful. That's enabled by our integrated ERP systems, by our view of standardized business process, by shared services. That's all great stuff. And at one level, it allows us to integrate operations globally. At one level, it allows us to simplify things. But underneath the covers, it does make things somewhat more complex, because nobody anymore has line of sight over a process execution. And that does bring controls into a sharper focus. Top left, you see that you might expect with the wonderful ERPs we have implemented, and this the intelligent way we've implemented things, you'd think that therefore there wouldn't be much leakage through these processes. But the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners is one of many organizations that do a regular survey, and they basically have determined that a typical organization loses the equivalent of 5% of revenues to fraud, waste, and error. Now, it isn't just fraud, even though they're an Association of Fraud Examiners, it is waste and error. But 5% leakage of an organization is a massive amount. It accounts probably to 25% of profits for most organizations. So that's a massive piece. What's even worse is that number seems to be going up, because the latest one I saw was 5.85%. So it's not getting any better. The bottom left, you see some of the examples of where these things get leaked out. And obviously, middle of the bottom middle cartoon is the point about accuracy. We've still got to make sure we're accurately capturing what's the results of our activities. And of course, again, you would be forgiven of thinking, as many executives do, they think, well, these days we've invested so much in our process and systems, surely it is now easier and cheaper to assure our business processes. And the answer is no, not really. So it's raising a bunch of questions, both at the micro and macro level, that give us a bit of context around some of the challenges. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 4 pillars of assurance and financial control. This particular one, segregation of duties, should need no introduction, so I'm not going to talk in great detail, other than it is a core pillar focused around eliminating or restricting any conflicts of interest that might cause inappropriate action. And it's typically combined with a sensitive access control associated with making sure that particularly sensitive activities have only very few people can perform, such as opening previously closed financial periods, for example. So that's our key financial control. But as we move through, we're also very aware that the organization is a dynamic living beast, and the people that have access to perform tasks, do work, there's a lot of change going on. So it's joiners, movers, and leavers simplistically, but of course we've got to make sure that all our staff that as they come into the organization, they get the right access to do the right things over and above segregation of duties, and as they move to different jobs, they get they get access restricted for the things they used to do and provided for the new things they do. And when they leave, obviously, it's all taken away. But it's not just about staff. It's also about contractors, business partners, outsource providers. Who else has access to our business processes and systems? And it's getting more complex. And it's not just about the obvious joining, promotion, leaving. It's also what happens during holiday cover, delegation of authority, job rotation, promotions, additional responsibilities, and so on. And there's got to be clear approval processes for that. And this is one of the areas where we see some challenges with segregation duties and other elements. And of course, the third pillar of assurance is that ability to monitor and sustain embedded process controls. You can have process controls which are manual, but I'm talking here about those automated process controls that are settings in your ERP, such as a three-way match, approval levels, tolerances, limits, mandatory data, all that stuff. And if we can have that well automated, that's another good pillar of assurance to make sure that our processes at least will be recorded in an appropriate way. And then the fourth pillar of assurance is the idea about transaction exception monitoring, monitoring the actual activities for specific sensitive activities. And some people argue that with the challenge of getting this last mile of SoD, perhaps this is the answer, perhaps we should just be looking at the transactions. And I think there's an argument for that, but I don't think it's completely correct. But transaction exception monitoring is also important as a compensating control, which we'll hear more of later. So, for sensitive transactions or things that shouldn't happen according to policy, if we can identify if and when those happen, we've got detail about the master data and transactional activity, so we can take action. So those are the kind of four levels of control that we're referring to. Now, I would like you to get involved here. There are going to be a few polls. They're pretty simple. But we want to build this up, and we're going to share this information with you as you go, and also at the end. You're going to get all this information back. It's all anonymized, but simple one to start with. Can you just enter a poll here, give us a response about your role in your organization relative to segregation duties? Now, one is, I am the overall business owner for all SoD risk. Two is, I'm one of the SoD business risk owners. Number three, I'm responsible for the IT or ERP process with regard to SoD. Four, you represent audit or independent assurance. Or five, you're just an interested observer. If you can, hopefully this is a really easy one. So if you can just give us 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and we'll give you 5 seconds. I'm sure this is not going to be too onerous. And okay, 5, 4. If you can't decide, it's probably one of them. 3, 2, 1. Right, let's have a look. See what we've got. So we have an interesting, the majority, the biggest single group of you represent audit and independent assurance, which is interesting. The second biggest group is kind of shared between those who are responsible for SoD in the IT ERP arena and interested observers. Interestingly enough, there is almost no one, I can't actually see the left bit of that, but oh yeah, the 3% of you are overall business owners for SoD risk, and a number, so probably 20% of you, 1 in 5, are actually business risk owners. So this is going to be very relevant to you, this whole discussion. It's relevant to us all, but we're going to see how this plays out. Another question, who owns SoD in your organization? I don't mean the name, I mean what function owns segregation of duties? Is it 1, finance or financial control? Is it 2, internal audit? Is it 3, ERP, IT, security, one of those groups? Is it 4, another group that you can define and know about in your organization? Or is it 5, actually unknown or unclear? Hopefully this will take a little bit more thought, but shouldn't take too long. Please give us the answer to that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the old scoreboard. And excellent. So, well, that's good news. So nearly 50% of you, SoD is owned by finance and financial control, which is generally regarded, certainly in my mind, as an appropriate thing. I find it interesting. So ERP, IT, security, 21%. We're going to come into that. We'll talk a little bit about, I mean, this is part of the issue, so we'll come into this. And internal audit, I always find this a little bit tricky. Internal audit as independent assurance, to own a process itself, seems to me somewhat confusing, but that's generally more common in North America than it is in Europe for some obscure reason. But that's all good news, so thank you, everybody. And one more before we get back into the mainstream of things. What level of attention do you currently get, or do you get from external audit on segregation duties? So from external audit. So one is we've never had much attention on this topic. Two, we've had audit issues. They're now resolved, all quiet now. Three, we have ongoing audit discussions on specific SoD issues, like the individual violations. Four, we have ongoing audit discussions regarding our process for SoD, the visibility, auditability of the process. And five, this is just a hot topic on every which way. So hopefully that is fairly straightforward. The question mark you might be thinking, the difference between 3 and 4, 3 is about looking at specific SoD issues. You've got issues here or here or here, specific business functions. And 4 is your process itself able to be relied on by external audit? So 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look. So now this is interesting. So ongoing, so the biggest issue is ongoing audit discussions on the process itself. So that's interesting, and that is kind of consistent. The good news about that is, at least it does show a level of maturity. If you're having, the 28% of you are having lots of discussions about the specific SoD issues, then there's opportunities for you to do something there, which we'll talk about. No, that's very interesting. Thank you. Now, it's no surprise audit has a big, external audit particularly has a big interest in segregation duties, and as does executive management, because access control and segregation duties are regarded still as the simplest and most effective foundation control against fraud, waste and error for obvious reasons. The challenge is it's not quite as easy to do as it might seem, as we've probably all found out. So if I think about if I talk about the SoD progress so far, this is talking about, let's say, an amalgam of dozens, probably hundreds of organizations I've spoken to over the years about the journey through SoD, and I think this represents a lot of organizations, so hopefully you'll identify some things common to your own experience. So typically there have been long-running, low-level awareness of user access, segregation duties issues, a kind of dial tone of general frustration, if you like, or a dial tone of issues. At some point there's an audit finding with a management letter or a particular comment which management find, okay, we've got to deal with this. Then a sudden frenzy of activity, a project initiation, goes through the classic project structure. There's a software selection acquisition. There's a project initiated for access control with a project manager and a sponsor and all the rest of it. And there's software is implemented. There's some remediation of low-hanging fruit, the most egregious SoD issues. And then audit moves on to higher priority issues, the next issues. And maybe management focus moves on a bit as well. But the residual operational SoD sensitive access issues continue. And of course, the organization continues to evolve and thrive with changes in organization structure, changes in processes, changes in systems, job roles, people, and all the joiners, movers, leavers piece we discussed already. So issues continue and the organization continues to change, and I guess that's a recipe for the situation we find ourselves in. So, another question for you. Your organization's current status with segregation of duties. 1, we have a mature SoD process supported by technology that works well for both the business and IT. 2, we have an SoD process and a technology, but the process is not operating as smoothly as we would like. 3, we've got an SoD process that's fallen into disrepute and disrepair. Don't worry, this is anonymous, so you don't need to be ashamed. Number 4 is we have an SoD project underway currently. And 5, we're considering plans to address segregation of duties. Could you give that a go, please? It shouldn't take long either, so I'll give you 10 seconds. 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look. So, what do we see there? So the biggest is, right, that's very, now that, if I hadn't placed a bet, that's where I would have placed it. So you've got the 40% of you have an SoD process and technology, but the process isn't operating as smoothly as you'd like. So hopefully the findings and lessons that we're going to share are going to be highly relevant to that. Then the next biggest chunk is we have a mature process for both business and IT, and it's working well. Excellent. So, and then there's a few of you doing SoD projects and so on. Good. Right, so we talked about this last mile, this wall, this kind of emotional, psychological, physical barrier. So what is this stubborn last percentage about? And when we talk to organizations, and the conversations I've had around the world is, these are typically the topics that come up. Stakeholder management, do our stakeholders, are they still focused on what we're doing? Do we have the right stakeholders? Do they care? Then this whole issue about, well, we had an SoD project, but this doesn't stop when the project finishes, right? What about the process? And thirdly, the understanding of what the issue is all about, because it does get confused, and relative priorities is another issue, and technical challenges related to ERP. The complexity of ERP security models can kind of confuse and confound things. And then communication, just generally about what progress means, and another big issue. So these are some of the things we see, and hopefully some of those resonate with you. But the most succinct comment I saw very recently, which was a lovely comment really, which is simple. It says, why is implementing GRC access control so easy, but cleaning up access such an uphill task? And I think that is the essence of it. We've been led to believe that the tools will be the answer, but there's a lot more to it, as we find. So what is your biggest challenge to sustainable SoD success? One is conflicting priorities. Two, business commitment, business ownership, clarity of the business or buy into the process from a business point of view. Three, ERP security, role concept challenges. Four, IT, ERP, SoD, technology, complexity issues. Five, or no challenges, it's a breeze. I just go on webcasts now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just give us that. We're going to feed this all back to you, and hopefully it's going to become clear how this all relates into the information we're going to share. So 10 seconds, 5 seconds. So what's the biggest challenge for you? Even if you're doing very well, there's probably one of those that's got to be a big challenge. Okay, let's have a look at the answers. So yes, okay, clarity by the process by far, 65%. A few of you, 4% of you are having a great time. I wish I had your job. Okay, and a smaller percentage, yeah, that is kind of, again, this is very consistent with what we would expect, so I think we're going to be on the same page. Right, so as I lead into the next piece of this whole, that finding there from that last poll about the process is fundamentally, in my mind, the bit that is really has been missing for a lot of us. A sustainable, repeatable process for SoD, it's not a project, and I think we do ourselves a disservice when we launch a project for SoD, because by definition, management assume a project has a start and an end, so when it's ended, it's done. And of course, a process doesn't have an end, it continues. So if you think about this model, and I just encourage everybody just to use this, write it down, we'll share the slides, but these things are ways of being clear about what it takes to make a process work. And actually it's true whatever the process is, but specifically here we're talking about the SoD process. So at the top, there's nine slices or segments of this Pentagon. Mission and objectives. What are the outcomes we expect for SoD? You might think that's really obvious and simple, but part of the issue is it isn't. So what do executive management want from your SoD endeavor? Is it, I just want to get rid of these audit comments for this year? Well, yeah, really, is that all we want to do? Or are we worried about audit comments next year? Worried about anything else? Getting the clear outcome is one of the challenges, and I know many organizations have struggled with it. Second one, stakeholder management. We all know about stakeholder management for any endeavor, but we have a stakeholder, we have a series of stakeholders. Do we have all the stakeholders that are relevant, both for the endeavor of internal control and risk and segregation of duties and the processes that are impacted? What happens when stakeholders change? When the CFO moves and we get a new CFO in, do we just carry on regardless? How do we deal with that? And we've got to pre-handle it. We can't just wait for things to happen. Measuring and communicating progress. This comes up as a massive issue regularly. How do we let the audit committee, the steering committee, executive management know that we're making progress, we're moving forward, or we're moving back, and what that means? What is the measure of success? Is it the number of SoD violations? Or frankly, executive management probably don't care what the number of SoD violations are. So that's an interesting point. Then there's the organization and governance of the whole process and program. How are we going to run this thing? Because it isn't just a project. Process design itself. If you're implementing a process, and for most organizations, SoD never was a process. It was something that was, it might have been a policy, but there was never a process designed around it. So at least we're going to refine or design a process. What is it? Where does that process sit? The placement, sourcing, and operation. Is it all in headquarters? Is it all in finance? Is it all in IT? Or is it distributed? Is it in shared services? Is it in local operations? And as we go through the rest of this, a lot of this will become clear, but it's not obvious, and it's not the same for every organization. Next, you have automation and enabling technology. Now, given the amount of time spent on talking about technology in this topic, it's kind of interesting to realize it's one of 9. And frankly, it's becoming, the least, or certainly one of the least important. Do we have the skills and capability to make this work on an ongoing basis? And then at the top, at 11 o'clock there, business service management. As a process, are we delivering to the business a process that works and provides value for money, solves the risk issues it's meant to be? How do we know we're doing a good job? How do we know when the business need new things? And how do we bring new things into the process? Now, these are critical questions, and what we have learned is if you can use these questions or these themes and ask some questions within it, get your stakeholders, both current and potential stakeholders, together and do an assessment in a workshop or in whatever form you want to say, where do we believe we sit today and where do we aspire to be, and get some consensus. You'll be very interested in the results. But that leads us on to more of this. So I'd like to introduce now to Martin, who's going to talk to you a bit further about this.
Thanks, Dan. Let's just have a quick look at the a generic business process model for SoD remediation. So top left to right, moving down to the bottom. What do? We gain the executive ownership, agree the outcomes, what success should look like. We perform typically a risk review and define our SoD scope. We identify who the units of management are. Units of management, this is a term we're using today. It's a generic term, but what I mean by this, depending which company you are, you may split this by region or by country, by business unit, by operating company. So for the sake of today, we're talking about a unit of management. So we define who the units of management are. We then do maybe some revision of the technical job profiles within our ERP systems. We evaluate tools and put in our monitoring technology. We may then address systemic issues in the system, IT admin roles, for example, basic exclusions on standard roles, responsibilities, and of course then more importantly, we plan and execute our remediation, and we also want to think about the sustainable process, the stay clean process, with a compliant user access provisioning. And of course, throughout this whole process, we're communicating, educating, we're looking at issues, and we're trying to improve the process. And what I want to look at today specifically are the second box on the top from the left. So looking at the actual risk assessment for the scope of SoD. Now, I've seen customers who are now on maybe their 3rd or 4th iteration of refining those risks based on changes to process. But I have clients who, they're in their 5th year of doing SoD, and they still have the same controls in place as they started day one, and maybe it's time to review those. As we all know, business changes and the risks and priorities change. So we'll have a look at that in a lot closer. Number 3, I think the definition of the units of management, that's pretty clear, but what is very important is being able to support the business to ensure that the execution of remediation is successful. And the better we can support and nurture the business in order to do that, then the more successful the project will be. And I also want to look at the implementation of the preventive process. So we go to all this trouble to get our systems clean, and of course then we need to kick in a stay clean process to prevent further SoD conflicts in this, this dynamic world of joiners, movers, and leavers. And typically what I've seen is most companies know they've got to do that, but often it's sort of left to a last-minute decision. Yeah, which way shall we do it? And I think it needs more clarification and a better definition up front as to, you know, what is this process going to be? What's it going to involve? And perhaps staying with this stay clean process, this sustainable, preventive, compliant user access provisioning, I find this framework very useful in order to map out what the actual end-to-end process is for access control management. Going across the top, you can see we've got processes like boarding for staff and for externals, creating identities for these users, looking at the access control policies, the user provisioning, and the user attestation, and then looking at who's responsible for these processes. What is it we do? How do we do it? Is there oversight, and where are the risks? And I find this it's a really useful tool in helping us to decide how we're going to define and manage compliant user access provisioning. And it's a very easy framework to build, but it's quite challenging actually to fill in the blanks and put this framework together. But a good exercise in helping with you know, putting the compliant user access provisioning together. So what I mainly want to talk about today is, as Dan said, you know, how do we mitigate this residual risk, this last mile in our SoD initiatives, and why do they become so difficult, and why do they get lost along the way? I mean, some of the things I've seen is you get changes in stakeholders, changes in the priority of the initiative with regard to other initiatives in the company, and that can be quite dangerous. You know, that can change perceptions from a business perspective. The people responsible for the remediation, you know, if they no longer see this as a top priority, then very quickly it goes to the bottom. It goes to the bottom of the pile. I've also seen personnel changes in the central group responsible for the remediation initiative, and you know, that can cause things, you know, like lack of support for the business. And those are sort of some of the things that I've seen that can have an effect on you know, making this last mile very difficult. And what I'd like to discuss with you over the next few slides is something we've been doing with our clients, engagements where we by unit of management actively go on site and run workshops, interviews, the idea being taking all the information on the SoD conflicts with us into these workshops and not leaving them, or not letting the line managers, risk owners out the room until we've made a decision. Not very difficult. Usually we get that done in 60 to 90 minutes, but the idea of actually capturing the decisions on the resolution path for these conflicts as we complete the workshops. But before we get into the details of that, maybe as you get to this point in time where you're hitting the wall of the last mile, it may be also a good time to reevaluate the actual risk scope with regard to segregation of duties. I think gone are the days of, you know, the purist exercise of you know, putting 200 best practice SoD controls in place and monitoring for them. Today, you know, from an enterprise risk management perspective, one would assure that you know, we're covering and addressing the main risks with regard to SoD. So this might be a time to reevaluate that, and it's quite easy to do in rapid business-focused workshops in scenarios where we, you know, using approaches like you know, matrices and heat maps, is to re-establish re-identify where the main risks are from a business perspective, and that may reconfirm the validity of SoD controls that we're already in place. It might show us that some of them, we don't need them anymore, but it also might bring and highlight new risks that we need to segregate, or new tasks that we need to segregate and monitor. And of course, once we have identified our new scope, then we need to, from an ERP perspective, we need to map those tasks to the ERP versions and implementations that we have. So the idea being divide and conquer. So the idea, we go out on site to the units of management and facilitate the workshops. And of course, in order to do that, we need to get the right information together to go into those workshops. And typically, the units of management dimension is not very well represented in our ERP systems. You know, the relationship is, you know, may be down to just a department within our ERP systems. So we need to get that information and then enhance our SoD conflict data with that information. So we need things like not just the user ID and the name of the person with SoD conflicts, but perhaps that person's function, department, the location, the line manager, and we enhance the violation data with that information in order to then plan out how we're going to tackle the last mile by unit of management. An important thing, let's not forget contractors and business partners, because their information is often in a different place, because the process for internal people and contractors, business partners is different. And of course, as we plan this final mile exercise, we need to get the right stakeholders together. From a central perspective, the global stakeholders, be they internal controls, risk and compliance, internal audit, our IT security, ERP, maybe our business process owners, as our support team, if you will, and we need to talk to the identified stakeholders by units of management, be they financial controllers, line managers, subject matter experts, the people that we need to actually get into the workshops, interviews, to make the decisions on how best to resolve the remaining SoD issues. And once we've planned our action, then we need to prepare the relevant information for those rapid workshops and interviews. Typically, this is an overview by departments of users with SoD conflicts by business process cycle. The details of that from a business perspective, from a technical perspective, and if we have a compensating control catalog, then we should have that at hand as well. Just as an aside, compensating control, I think we all know what a compensating control is. Typically, if it is deemed that neither task from a segregation of duties can be removed from a particular user, be that because of organizational restrictions, deputization, small departments, etc., then of course classically we need to put in place an additional control to monitor the appropriateness of transactions according to those tasks, that they are proper and not influenced by conflict of interest. And as we all know, compensating controls means more work for the risk owner or the line manager involved. So we have our information, and we go on site and we conduct our workshops and interviews, so we can present the situation summary, what the options are, agree an approach for resolving each issue by department. We can document that on the fly. And the important thing about this is the idea here is actually getting the decision on the resolution path for each conflict, rather than here's the information on the remediation, this is what you've got to do, this is the tool you can use to do it, so let's talk again in a month and see where we are. And we're probably not that much further, but the idea here is the goal is to actually get the decision made in the room before we walk out for that specific department. And with regards to the our Stay Clean, sustainable, preventive, compliant user access provisioning process, while we're on site, it's a very good chance to communicate, educate the units of management here, because they're going to be part and parcel of this process as we move forward. So, to communicate what's expected of them, what are the rules of play, how we're going to do it, expectations, etc. And we can get their feedback as to what they think of the whole process as well. Get their buy-in, I suppose, is the main thing. Talking of getting the decision made, so what are the actual actions? What's the resolution path that we can record with regard to each SoD conflict? So, of course, we can address those in the ERP system itself. So we can reduce access to eliminate the conflicts. We can assign compensating controls to mitigate the exclusion of not removing access. We can detect and discuss roles or responsibilities that maybe need a redesign because they have the inherent SoD conflict within them. And we may find false positives that need to be discussed, and we can capture that information and take that back to maybe to internal controls and discuss that with them. I have here an example of one of the working documents we use. On the left-hand side, you will see the user information by function, department, and line manager. Top right-hand side is the business process and cycle of segregation of duties conflicts. And typically we sit down and discuss everything that's an X, which is a conflict, and we show the details of each violation if necessary, and that X can then be changed on the fly to remove task A, remove task B. No, here for this one I need a mitigating control. Here we have a false positive, etc. This drives the decision making within the workshop, and we're capturing the information on that decision before we leave the workshop or interview. Again, summary views of the information that we can discuss at the end of each meeting. Here we have on the left-hand side the SoD controls by business process cycle. Across the top we have the departments, and anything in green is a need or a request for a compensating control. Now, very quickly we can see, if one department, if we see one whole column is green, then obviously something's wrong here, because that department has requested compensating controls for every department, and it's something we can discuss at the end of the review, or it's something that we can take back to internal controls and discuss what the maybe it's better not to put in compensating controls, but to talk to that particular unit of management in the business and discuss whether it's better to actually change process or organization rather than put in compensating controls for every rule, which is certainly not the best idea. And again, as I said, it's an excellent opportunity. We're on site, so let's discuss the sustainable process. Let's educate the business on what that is. We can revisit the governance model. We can talk about that. We can can discuss everything on and around the Stay Clean process. I've seen businesses not understand the finesses between you know, what's this exercise we're doing as a get clean exercise when we're doing user access reviews and certification attestation? What's the difference? So it's a good opportunity to discuss that and ensure that the business is that they do understand, you know, what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the expectation is and the rules of play, etc. So to conclude, I think, you know, the 5 things to take away, certainly a focus on the end-to-end process. Again, you know, nurturing the business, supporting the business. As I said, at the end of the day, success relies on them. And the more they understand what it is we want to achieve and why, what's expected, where the responsibilities and accountabilities are, then the better we can achieve that. The fact that business changes and the risks and priorities change, so maybe you know, an annual or biannual revision of the SoD risk scope is probably a useful thing to do. And of course, that engagement with the business, the nurturing, you know, it's not about giving them a tool, training them in it and saying, thanks very much, there you go, you sort out your remediation. They need help, be that from a business perspective or an IT perspective. And I think the word nurture and support is a good way to communicate with the business. Effective compensating controls. If we do have that catalogue, let's make sure that the business understand what compensating controls are, what they're for, why they are there, and that they also mean more work. So it's not always the best thing to put one in place. But often I've seen that the business is left to come up with compensating controls on their own without any support. And, you know, maybe, you know, if there is a catalogue centrally available, then there is a potential to reuse and maybe to understand, get a better understanding of what compensating controls are by looking at the examples in the catalogue. And I think also the idea of thinking about business as usual, the stay clean preventive process once we've got clean, the idea that we need to put this end-to-end process together, and if you know, the better we can automate it, then the easier that is as well. And just to come back to this Pentagon that Dan spoke of earlier, I mean, it's you know, it is a good way, it's a good view to you know, communicate with stakeholders on progress through the whole 9 areas of the SoD remediation. I mean, today I've specifically talked on and around the bottom 3 highlighted in yellow, so around program, organization and governance, process design and the process placement, sourcing and operation. But as I said, I think it is a good barometer to assess and communicate to stakeholders where we are within our SoD process.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that insightful tour through lessons we've learned there. That's very helpful. I think I would just underline this point about these units of management. I have seen, I'm sure you all experience this, local management around the world getting a little frustrated with SoD activities, and I've seen very clearly a great response from local financial controllers around the world. Time is short, we all know that, but in 60, 90 minutes be able to crack the issue and make the decisions rather than have a kind of a long-running set of issues is very, very appealing to them. So, you know, that's all part of this discussion. So thanks very much, Martin. Couple final polls here. So SoD monitoring and remediation tools in use. Don't really want to know the names of them, but can you just respond to this? 1 is we don't have any tools in. 2, we use Excel or another desktop tool. 3, we use an ERP vendor provided tool, so the SoD tool provided by our ERP vendor. 4, some tool, independent, best of breed. Or 5, you're using an identity management tool with embedded SoD checks in it. Can you just give us a response on that? Again, it's going to be interesting statistics to share with you all. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I guess you will know the answer to that. So 10 seconds. So I have no tools, Excel or a desktop, number 2. 3, ERP vendor provided. 4, independent. 5, identity management based. Okay, let's have a look. So the majority, the biggest single group, 36% of you are using tools provided by your ERP vendor, shortly followed by people provided by independent tools. Nobody's using identity management as an integrated approach, and still 27% of you using desktop tools. Okay, that's useful, thank you. Martin talked about compensating controls, very important part of the journey. I want to understand your use and maturity level of compensating controls for segregation duties. 1 is, we have not yet defined our compensating controls. 2 is, we've defined the compensating controls, but their use is varied, like mixed. 3, they're in use, but we're not sure that our compensating controls are effective. 4, our compensating controls work effectively for IT access, but not in a business. Or 5, they work effectively across the business and IT. Can you have a look at that? It should be fairly straightforward. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 10 seconds, please. Thank you. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at that. So the biggest group is you have them in use, not sure they're effective. Okay, now that is now hopefully some of the things Martin shared with you, which again, these are not our ideas. We're basically feeding back what we've learned from organizations around the world. Hopefully some of this stuff is going to help, because if you combine the issue about making sure you're dealing with the right risks, making sure you're pushing back on compensating controls with getting out of the business, you're going to find that a lot easier. 24% of not implemented not defined compensating controls. And you know what? That's not such a bad idea. As Martin indicated, you don't want to make it too easy. So excellent, thank you. Final poll. Martin also talked about prevent, business as usual, the SoD, sensitive access, enabled user access provisioning. Can you share what your status is in the organization? 1 is you do manual user access changes into the ERP via a help desk, maybe with a ticketing system. 2, you have a fully integrated workflow, but it's only for emergency access, perhaps just for IT. 3, you have a fully integrated workflow automated via your GRC or SoD tool. 4, fully integrated workflow automated via an identity management system. Or 5, a fully integrated workflow automated via HR system. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Could you just give us a response there? 10 seconds. Let's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the old scoreboard. What have we got? And the majority, yeah, not surprised, 45% of you, largely manual changes, maybe with ticketing support. Second largest, integrated via a GRC SoD tool. Again, that's not surprising. Interestingly enough, nobody is got it integrated only for emergency access. It's funny, I'm convinced there's some people on this webcast who actually have got that. But anyway, that's very useful. Right, thank you. Just coming to a conclusion, please ask your final questions. I know we're running short of time, but ask questions anyway, because we're going to get back to you by email even if we can't speak to them. So, considerations, end-to-end process focus, that, Pentagon, you know, it's yours, use it. The 9 themes of managing the, getting the end-to-end process management for SoD. Business risks, Martin talked about that. Get a risk review. Make sure that your risks reflect the current organization, current process, current view of risk, current systems, because there's nothing worse than doing SoD remediation only to find the risks don't mean anything. Engaging with the local management. Not about tool training, as Martin's said. That's a critical piece. Design and operation of effective compensating controls. Sustaining business as usual, stay clean. Those are critical things. Now, you can do those yourselves. Martin has shared good information with you. The stuff on these slides. If you want help, we can help. But the most important thing is we've got to get through this wall and get to sustainable processes. Conclusions, it's not a project. Expunge the word project from any of your SoD vernacular, and that will help, because it's not surprising that when management think they're funding a project, they expect it to come to an end. And it isn't a project, it's a process. Involved, devolved business management and remediation. Prevention is key, this kind of the business as usual piece. Overall governance, the Pentagon. it trumps everything. If you've got the governance working, everything else will get sorted out. So that whole piece of a mechanism to help manage stakeholders, outcomes, and all the things you need to do, that was the Pentagon. You can get a copy of these slides, use it at will. And think global, act local is used a lot in business. But in SoD and internal controls, we have a habit of thinking global and acting central. So we've got to think global, act local. Those are kind of key conclusions. That's what we've discussed. I know it'll take a few minutes more than we promised. I hope you found it useful. If you've got any more questions, do ask us. You can get hold of, send more, if you've got any more questions now which you haven't put into the system, send them to Emma and she'll get them to the right person. I am going to be cheeky and to use a couple more minutes because there's some great questions here. We're going to give a couple of them to you, or certainly we're trying to respond to them. I mean, one of the ones which grabbed my eye immediately, which I'll give to Martin. If the key issues are all about process, what's the value of an SoD or GRC tool, Martin?
Okay, so we haven't discussed the SoD tools themselves. We've been looking at the, you know, it's been more of a people thing that we've looked at. I know that we often do tend to you know, get bogged down in the nitty-gritties of SoD rules and violations and T codes, functions and roles and responsibilities. Yet, you know, we do need this information. We do need to monitor for assurance, and it's all complex stuff. And an audit, you know, the tool will give you a better audit trail, give you better decision tracking, support for compensating controls. So I think it's a non-starter. You got to have technology to do
Okay,
this.
so thanks, Martin. So they're worth having, but they're only 1/9 of the challenge. I'm going to give you one more. Can we do these local management workshops remotely by web conference?
Well, you can, yes, certainly. I mean, we've done that with customers in the past, but I think you need to think about, you know, the primary goals for the workshops. You know, we're sharing information. We want to get local management commitment, and we want to drive into making decisions. So if it's just about the first one, then yes, you can do that by WebEx. But if it's about getting buy-in and driving decisions and getting the commitment, then I think it does pay to go on site.
Okay, so a bit of yes, bit of no. Right, we're going to call a halt there. We've got some other great questions. I'll just tell you one of them which we're not going to answer because we haven't got time. How do we reinvigorate our stakeholders after many years of SoD activity and some loss of interest? I'm going to respond to you by email because that is a great question. In fact, I think a lot of people will have a view on that. And we've got some other questions as well. We'll respond to those by email. I apologise for taking about 10 minutes more of your time than we promised. I hope you found it useful. Got any more questions? Contact us via Emma. You can find out more stuff around our thoughts on these topics through our website, through LinkedIn, or through our Twitter thingy, what they're called, Twitter handle, I believe they call it. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you can take at least one thing away from that and start today and make your SoD a more sustainable process. Thanks very much indeed.